So the next tracking tool is cervical fluid. Cervical fluid is a special fluid created by your cervix that allows sperm to survive and swim up through your cervix, into your uterus, and up to your fallopian tubes. Cervical fluid, also known as cervical mucus, changes consistency throughout your cycle. So as you get closer to ovulation, you'll see or you'll feel an increase in wetness. So if your goal is to get pregnant, this means it's go time and you want to use this time to keep that sperm alive. Or if you're trying to prevent pregnancy, this is a sign to either abstain or to use barrier methods of some sorts or do other things. So you can use another form of birth control like condoms or the withdrawal method. Just be aware that you're taking on the risk of effectiveness of that method. More information about cervical fluid. So fertile cervical mucus is very similar to semen. It has similar properties, similar pH balance, which is tightly controlled by your body with cervical mucus. It also provides nutrients, antioxidants, and helps to move the sperm quickly through the vaginal canal, through the cervix, and into the uterus. So all these things give sperm the best chance to survive within your body until it can meet the egg. And when a woman ovulates, the egg only lives for 12 to 24 hours once it has been released. But the fertile cervical mucus keeps the sperm alive for up to 5 days. So this extends your fertile window, which is that window of time that you can have intercourse and conceive. So this cervical mucus extends the fertile window from that 12 to 24 hour period, life of an egg, plus about 5 days. So this is 6 days total. So you don't have to have sex on the exact day of ovulation to conceive, and that's thanks to cervical mucus. We actually want the sperm already inside of you by the time the egg is released to have the best chances of fertilization. So this is why knowing what your fertile cervical mucus looks and feels like, so you know when your fertile window is approaching, can be really helpful to time intercourse properly in order to get pregnant. Or know when to avoid unprotected sex to avoid pregnancy. Take a look at the different types of cervical fluid. Starting out, after menstruation, you'll typically have some dry days. So that's days of no cervical fluid. So these dry days are considered low fertility and happen typically right after menstruation and again after ovulation occurs in the end of your cycle. Then it transitions to sticky. So this is typically the first fluid produced as your body prepares for ovulation. It's thick, tacky, gummy, like drying glue. The main point here is that it's not really wet. It's sticky. If you rubbed it between your fingers, it would ball up and can be white or slightly yellow in color. Then from sticky, it transitions to creamy, and it's creamy and thick like lotion. This is considered high fertility, and it can be milky or cloudy white in color. And you'll notice that it feels wet when wiping. This is typically the fluid that comes right before that peak cervical mucus. And then ultimately you get to this egg white cervical mucus that's very stretchy and slippery, similar to egg white texture. And you'll notice if you pinch it, it stretches and it's clear and lubricative. So this is your most fertile, extremely fertile cervical mucus. It's very high in water content and very similar texture to seminal fluid or snot, could be another way to think of it. So another thing to point out is that cervical mucus should not have a distinct smell to it. So if you're smelling something that resembles smelly fish or yeast or baking bread, that's an indicator that there's an infection going on and you need to go see your doctor. So this just shows you the typical pattern of your cervical mucus throughout your menstrual cycle. So as you can see here, after your period ends, it goes to dry, and then it transitions to sticky, and then creamy, and then finally egg white, peak cervical mucus, right as ovulation approaches. And then after ovulation ends and that fertile window ends, it becomes dry throughout the rest of your luteal phase. So the estrogen is actually what stimulates cervical mucus production. So as the follicles are beginning to produce estrogen, the cervical mucus starts to get sticky. And then as estrogen continues to rise, it turns to creamy. And then as estrogen peaks, it becomes egg white consistency. And then as estrogen drops off quickly, so does the cervical mucus, and it becomes dry. So how do you check your cervical fluid? So you're going to begin checking your cervical fluid the first day that your period ends. So as you're learning this, the best thing to do is to check every time that you go to the bathroom. So multiple times a day as you're getting an idea of what's going on here. But you're going to get really good at this and you won't need to do it and check literally every time you go to the bathroom. So when you go to the bathroom, you're going to take a piece of toilet paper and fold it up a little bit and wipe from the front to the back. So this is ideally going to be done before you urinate and after you urinate. And as you wipe, I want you to pay really close attention because some cervical mucus can settle there. So I want you to ask yourself, does it feel smooth or dry or lubricated? And then after you wipe, take a look at the toilet paper. Do you see any cervical mucus on it? Does it look clumpy, slippery? Does it look smooth? Does it look wet? So try and determine the consistency of what you see and what you just felt. So now I know this is strange, but I want you to lift the secretion off the tissue with your thumb and middle finger. And again, ask yourself, how does it look and how does it feel? I know this seems different, but this is just your own bodily fluids. There's something weird about this. This is actually a sign that our body sends us for this exact reason. So ideally, you do this at least 3 times throughout the day. I think we all pee at least 3 times a day. And ideally at morning and at night. Also important to check your underwear because you might notice that some fertile cervical mucus might actually settle there on your underwear and it'll be circular because of its high water content. And then after paying attention throughout the day, I want you to record the most fertile fluid that you saw throughout the day, even if it's just one observation. So maybe you woke up and it was dry, but then it turned to sticky. I'd want you to record sticky. Or if it was creamy in the middle of the day, right before you went to bed, you noticed that it was egg white, you would record egg white. So record the most fertile cervical mucus that you notice no matter what time of day or how long you notice it. So here are some images for us to go through together. But what's cool is that you're going to figure out your own type, and these are guides on what it looks like, but you're going to figure out your own normal, and that might take a few months. So again, dry or no fluid is going to be when you're not fertile, and this is typically after your period ends until fluid is produced, and again, after your fertile window has ended. And then it transitions to sticky cervical mucus, which is that first fluid produced as your body prepares for ovulation, and this is considered low fertility cervical mucus. And it might be crumbly or rubbery or gummy-like. And then it transitions to creamy, which typically comes right before that peak cervical mucus. And this is also considered high fertility cervical mucus. And it's lotiony, creamy, and milky. And then it's not until you're at that peak cervical mucus that it's egg white, it's slippery, it's clear, and it's stretchy. It's also typically balls up in your panty line due to its high water content. And as you're approaching that fertile window, it could also be helpful to take a look in the toilet because when the peak cervical mucus, the egg white consistency, when it hits the toilet bowl, it might ball up due to its high water content. And it's going to be stretchy, like egg white consistency or like snot. And then use your tracking app to track your cervical mucus. And it takes a few months to get a hang of this and realize, like, oh wow, this is happening in my body. Or you might realize that it's not happening and you know what you need to work on. So just knowing how to track the changes leading up to ovulation is really, really important, and it's a really cool tool to use. And it's not something that doesn't have meaning. It's truly created by our bodies to help with the pregnancy process. So it's important for us to know that our bodies are optimally functioning in terms of our hormones. So there are some things that can affect cervical fluid. And it's important for you also to be able to differentiate between different fluids in the body. So vaginal infections, if your lady parts smell like yeast or smelly fish or like baked breads, that is potentially a vaginal infection and you need to go see your doctor. If you just had intercourse, seminal fluid may remain in your lady parts, and that is not the same as cervical fluid. Arousal fluid is something that your body produces as you're maybe playing around with your partner before intercourse, and that's not the same as cervical fluid. Lubricants that you might use in intercourse, again, not the same. And then antihistamines, if you take antihistamines regularly for allergies, that can dry out your cervical fluid. And then Clomid, which is used in fertility treatments, that can dry it out as well. So important things to take note of if you're noticing that your cervical fluid is a little bit drier than normal. Okay, let's talk about peak day. So peak day is right around ovulation. And the 2 rules of peak day are it's either the last day of lubricative vaginal sensation, so you just feel it in your panty line, or the last day of egg white cervical fluid that you are able to see and feel. So that means that you're only able to determine the peak day until the following day. So when it becomes dry again. So let's say you have cervical mucus on day 13, like they did here. They wouldn't know this is their last day of egg white cervical mucus until day 14 when it becomes dry again. So you would have to backtrack and write it afterward. This dryness starts because progesterone is starting to rise, which means ovulation did occur. But if you didn't see an abrupt shift from egg white cervical mucus to dryness, then that can mean delayed or no ovulation. So you need to keep tracking your cervical mucus. So this is especially important for baby avoiders to take note of their peak day. Okay, so just tying this all together, after menstruation ends, you see it go to dry, and then it turns to sticky, and then as you start to notice it becoming creamy, you know that you are approaching your peak ovulation, so you are in your fertile window, and then ultimately it becomes egg white as you see that ovulation occur, and then you confirm that it happened because you see those spikes in temperature, and it becomes dry again. It may take a few months to get an idea of what your cervical mucus looks like as it transitions to that peak cervical mucus. But it will be really helpful once you do get to know your pattern. And also it will help you if you're able to identify like, oh, I get cervical mucus my entire period long. That's something we need to address. Or if you don't get much cervical mucus at all, we need to address that as well. So again, a great way to get insight into your body. And this might all sound overwhelming, but I promise you just getting started is the best way to learn all of this.